Hello and welcome back to the Big O podcast. I am so excited today. We have got an amazing guest with us today. She is a transformational and embodiment leadership coach, and her name is Jamila Theobold. And I am so excited to talk to you today, Jamila. Hello.
Hello, Emma. I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh, Jamila, honestly, it's an absolute pleasure. And I'm so looking forward to our conversation. So for those that perhaps don't know you or haven't seen what you do, would you like to tell us a little bit about what you do before we begin?
Absolutely. So, I am a transformational embodiment leadership coach, as you said. And how I like to do is break those three components down. So, the transformation, any person that comes to work with me, the idea, the concept is we change. Excuse me. We change. And in that changing, there's there's the outward transformation that can happen. So I work with leaders in order to be able to embrace their leadership, to lead themselves. But the process of that change doesn't just happen on the outside. It's rethinking the way that we've always been patterned or conditioned to show up, to behave, especially as female leaders. Releasing the good girl, the people pleasing. And that takes a process, it takes time. And so that's the transformation that gets to happen. The embodiment piece is how we try on different strategies, how we try on different techniques, and then what we own and what we walk away with as ours. And then the leadership piece, as I mentioned, I work with female leaders that are leading social change. And so much of that social change requires us each individually to learn how to lead ourselves. And that's the work that I do.
This is such a big job and so powerful. And I've personally seen the transformation in some of my friends like Franca that I've said that works with you directly, and seeing the change and the transformation in her is simply amazing. So I know what you do is just, oh, I love it so much, and it's so essential, and I think it's needed. And, you know, change is something that I've been talking about quite a lot recently, because it's one of those things that I think people really fear,
Mhm.
but it's essential. It's the one thing that's certain in life, and it's the one thing, you know, we need to do that. I feel like it's a growth, and we get to evolve and become something that perhaps sometimes we can't even dream of. You know, one thing that I realized last year was that our imaginations can be quite limited, but
Mhm.
when we start taking those small steps to basically do everything that you was just talking about, you know, stepping into ourselves, embodying who we want to be, and doing all those little changes, our life can become something that perhaps we haven't even been able to imagine or dream of. And I think that's just so powerful. So everything you do is exactly what this world needs, I feel.
I want to say something really interesting about what you were saying about change, and it's something that happens to us all the time.
Mm,
We're going through cycles constantly. There's always an evolution that's happening within our bodies, within our minds. And the empowerment piece is where we get to step into the things that we have control over. There's so much that's changing that we don't. And I think this is where oftentimes we feel the resistance because we see this, what we figure is the world is happening to us as opposed to things are happening for us. And that's where the transformational piece comes, is that we can be empowered to activate that change as well.
yeah, I love that, actually, because I think a lot of people struggle with the word empowerment and kind of what it actually means. And your definition right there, I think, is spot on. You know, it's taking the things that we can control, because there is so much. There is so much that does happen that we don't have control over. So to be able to kind of take ownership, I suppose, over our own lives and the choices we make, and the way, even just the way we hold ourselves day to day, I feel can be so empowering. And I feel like that is kind of the first steps to being fully empowered in yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Knowing when you have a choice, for sure.
Yes.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so I wanted to speak with you because I've heard you speak, and particularly the live that you gave on your page. So anybody that hasn't actually been across and seen that, I would really encourage you to, because Jamila just talks about embodiment so beautifully in this live that she did, and that's what I kind of want to go and have a conversation with you about today. So I'd love it, for those that are kind of new to this, perhaps if you could maybe define, how would you explain what embodiment is to those that perhaps aren't really that familiar with it at the moment?
Certainly. So the word is in the word, meaning if you look at embodiment and you break it down, the word body is so essential to that. And oftentimes we learn, well, for instance, in business, we'll learn strategy, we'll learn the ways that we should be running a business, and it doesn't always land as our own. So we go through a process of trying to replicate what somebody else has done, but we don't own it. And what the process that I work my clients through is to really look at, on a day-to-day basis, does this feel like you? Are you bringing you into your business? And the term embodiment that I break it down is, let's try it on. Let's see if it fits. Just like if you go shopping and you try on perhaps a jumper and you're thinking, this doesn't feel like me. So much of our lives, we have been conditioned to try things on that is not ourselves, that doesn't feel like us. And it's almost like that itchy jumper where it's like, I'm going to put it on because everybody else says I should. It doesn't feel like me. And so going through the process of trying it on, tasting it, putting it into your own words, that is the embodiment piece, so that you show up fully owning the knowledge, the wisdom, the choices that you're making in life. And I think it is a process, because every single day we're presented with options. And every day we get to choose, is that me or is that not me?
Yeah, I really understand that. And actually, thinking about the journey that I've been on for the last few years now, so much of it at first has been about releasing. It's been first all of the shoulds, all of those roles that I'd kind of fit myself into because that was the right thing to do, the air quotes right thing, the shoulds. And so I really understand that. It's been a process, and at times a fairly painful process, of releasing first the things that didn't fit, before I could even really begin to understand what would. And even thinking about business terms, I've been in business now, the photographer side of my business I've been doing for 10 years. And over those 10 years, the amount I've learned, and all the knowledge and the marketing and all of the things that they teach you, and all of these kind of, like spreadsheets of do this, then do this, then do this, these formulas. And I'd have to say probably about 5% of them have actually worked for me, because that's not how I work. And that's been a huge process of a decade's worth of trying. Like, I love what you say about trying it on, seeing if it fits. And sometimes what I find is sometimes like a little bit of it fits, but the rest has to kind of come away, and you get to keep those bits that do actually work for you, and let the rest fall away. And I know that I personally can get stuck on but this should be working. It works for other people. Why is this not working for me? And I think a huge part of my personal journey has been about the self-awareness and fully understanding myself first, and also understanding that I'm constantly changing too.
Yes, goes back to the transformational. Yes.
Yes, constantly, learning. Every time I learn something new, like a little part of me still continues to shift, So it is.
It's very similar to, I like to speak in metaphors, and what you're saying is almost like when we look at our closet, and there's clothing in our closet that we haven't worn in years because it was part of our personality then. And I love what you said about releasing, because in order to bring more in, we have to let things go. And I'll never forget, I was in education for 15 years, and there was an image, right, of certain clothing that you wore as a teacher. And then I shifted to be a yoga instructor, and those clothes didn't fit anymore, figuratively, and also literally, some of them didn't fit. But I was like, thinking I should be wearing these things because I have invested in them, I've tried them on, I've worn them, and it took so long to release that image, to let that go in order to bring in the new image that, you know, I'm now embodying as a coach.
That is, do you know, I relate so much to that. It was exactly the same 15-year career as a primary school teacher. And the first thing that had to go was the wardrobe. There was so much. I literally at one point pulled my entire wardrobe off. And I feel like this was kind of the first step. I don't think I'd even, I had my notice ready to hand in at that point. But I had to release something in me first to be brave enough to give that in. And I remember very clearly getting my entire wardrobe out of my bed and going through it. It's like, I don't want to wear this anymore. Like, this is not me. This is not the person I am. And yeah, stepping into kind of fully being an artist and things like that, my clothing had to change. It was not practical for the work that I was doing at that point. And then I'm finding again at this point right now, it's like, okay, but that doesn't quite fit now. And even though I'm not entirely sure where I'm going yet, you know, I'm trying things on right now. And I love that it's, you know, it's a very visual thing. And I actually think the actual physical act of doing that, when you are at a point of transition in your life, I think the first thing I did was clear out my underwear drawer actually and go, I'm not wearing these anymore. I am releasing the feeling like frumpy kind of mum vibe, you know. It's like, I'm not wearing these pants anymore. This is not my vibe.
Yeah, that's a good place to start. It's what people can't see, right?
Yeah, exactly. But I could feel it on me, and you know, and then that led to the wardrobe, and then that actually led to big changes in my life. And I do think, you know, what you were saying about coming into the body, and I feel like even things like that, when you're actually actively doing something in your world, in your environment, or on you, that makes some kind of shift, can then really help you kind of work through those choices that we're kind of talking about, and the direction we want to go, and what feels right and what doesn't feel right, you know. So
and I have a well, I'm still a yoga instructor, but I don't teach formally anymore. And that was actually one of the elements, is the way that you embody is the physical, the movement. And even so much when we are, you know, a lot of my practice when I'm creating content is I go walking, and it's in the movement that new ideas start to come in. There's shifts that start to happen. And if we're not bringing in that physical, the movement element, it doesn't always get to land in the cell level because it just sits in the mind. It's a thought, and it's no longer, it's restricted from being able to drop down into the body.
And actually, I think so many people, myself included, get very caught up in the mind. I know that I do. I particularly having ADHD brain, and my head is like, I've heard it described as a hive, like it's just buzzing and many ideas. And the one thing that kind of grounds me and brings me back is being out, or, you know, planning. I've learned now to take a notebook with me, because when I decide, right, I'm having a day for me and I'm going to go for a walk somewhere, suddenly this clarity kind of floods over. It's like, oh, okay, you know. So I've learned now to always have a notebook with me, because it's actually those moments where I'm taking that time and giving myself space and doing something physical, taking myself out of the day-to-day. That's when actually I have the biggest, best and clearest ideas.
And you probably have embodied that now, where you just automatically grab something to take with you.
Yeah,
it's become your process, and it's beautiful.
And actually, I'd love to kind of talk to you a little bit more about this, you know, so that perhaps those people that do find, and I know a lot of the women that I talk to and work with, you know, this is one of the first things they always say, oh, but there's just so much to do. And, you know, they start listing off, I've got to do this, I've got to pick the children, I've got, you know, and we do that. And we're so in our heads that we forget about the now. And, you know, I absolutely love the book, The Power of Now. And I feel like that is so, you know, I would love to be able to fully embrace that all the time. But I know that my head gets caught up. So I would love your thoughts on kind of how to do that in the day-to-day life. You know, particularly a lot of the women I work with are mums, are holding down part-time or full-time jobs, are, you know, trying to find their way, basically. And how they can maybe step into the body and come back to now. I would love your thoughts on that.
So I have not perfected this because I too have an ADD brain. And one of the elements that I use in my coaching is human design. And I have a defined head and a defined ajna. And basically what that means is that I can spend days, hours, months in my head, and there's always something going. So I too experience the constant rumination of thoughts. And it's interesting because even just this weekend, I wrote wrote a journal entry about entrepreneurial anxiety. And it's the idea of having all of these plates spinning. And there's a beautiful thing that we have as entrepreneurs is our ability to see into the future and then come back and try to map out the steps towards that space. Well, that can be very overwhelming because if you think about where you want to be and all the things you have to do to get there, and there's being a mom, there's running a household, those sort of things. So a couple of things that I do as a practice, I journal. I do a brain dump of the thoughts that are in my head. One of my favorite books is Untethered Soul by Michael Singer. And he explains that we all have a voice in our head. And that voice is not you. So if you can start to just notice, oh, I'm thinking about this, or this thought is in my head. It's a mindfulness practice that we don't get caught up in the storm of the thoughts, but we're the eye, the calm center of the storm, and we can watch the thoughts, but not identify with them. So that's one of the processes is that we have to accept the fact that our minds, they have a job, and that job is to think, and that's okay. So having a whole lot of compassion and grace for the process that our brains are doing their job. And then from there, noticing what you attach meaning to and how you create a story based on those thoughts. Dropping into the body sometimes does require to go push pause, physically move, and because what also happens is when we have a thought, it will often lead to a feeling and a physical feeling within our bodies that either will reinforce a subconscious belief or create resistance towards a belief. And that's in that space and time. One of my favorite quotes is in between stimulus and response, there's a space, and that space we get to choose. And that's from Viktor Frankl. And so creating that space, I think all of us as moms, especially as high functioning women, we need to create space. And in that space, it's amazing what you can actually get done. It's almost like a counterintuitive. Like if I create space, then I'm not going to have time to get things done.
Yeah.
But multitasking and trying to get it all done when we're stuck in our heads is not the most effective and efficient way. And that's just based on my experience. Now, I do find myself slipping into that quite often still, but I do remind myself that this doesn't have to get done at like 11:59 on a Sunday night.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, this has actually been one of the hardest things for me to break. But I really agree with the whole brain dumping. That is a big thing for me. Brain dump, make a list. And, you know, I even find that sometimes I do that. I won't look at it again. I'll go back to it and go, oh, I've done all of this. Like it's just the process of getting it out of my head, like physically out of my head. Yeah. So I really resonate with everything that you're saying here, and the multitasking. I used to say that this was be very proud of that skill of mine. And now I realize that actually what I was doing was I was never fully present with anything. And then, I would think, oh, my memory is really bad, and I'd be forgetting things, and actually it wasn't. It's just that I just wasn't there when I was doing the thing that I was supposed to be focusing on. I would either be doing something else at the same time, or my head would be somewhere else. And actually, I feel that is an extremely draining way of living. What triggered a big change in career, for example, was that actually I ended up having a mental breakdown because it was, the overwhelm was, yeah, immense. It was absolutely immense. And I got to the point I couldn't speak, I couldn't breathe, I couldn't function. And then it was my art that actually got me out of it, because it was the physical process of drawing and allowing myself to come away from my head. And then slowly I started coming back, basically. But when I came back, I was different. Something had changed.
Certainly. And that it's interesting what you said as far as like the energy of the mentalizing. It does take a lot of energy out of our bodies because the brain is not supposed to be a motor center. It's supposed to take in information, and then we allow presence to create that process. And what I find with many of the women that I've worked with that have high functioning anxiety, it's to sit still is one of the most challenging processes to experience. And that's probably the first place to start with embodiment, because it does require us to really tune into our bodies. Yeah. When you're sitting still and you're feeling that agitation of the vibration in your body, it's really interesting just to pay attention to that. Sometimes what I'll suggest for newbies at the whole presence concept is to just go stand outside. And that way there's still stimulation that's coming in, but you're able to just pause. And it can be like 2 minutes, 3 minutes to just pause and be present. And then you start building up the practice of that, especially when you start noticing that you're a lot calmer and a lot nicer and nicer to yourself and to others. But if we continue to resist that ability to be present, then the body will whisper, and then it will start to scream, and it will say, I need you to stop.
Yeah.
It comes in a sickness or an injury, and then we're forced to be present, right?
Well, this is it, actually. I mean, that the mental breakdown started with a physical illness that wouldn't get better, and it was getting progressively worse. And over 6 weeks, it got worse and worse and worse until the doctor signed me off, called me back in a week later, and then said, let's talk about the mental issue. And that was a very good doctor that spotted that. But it started with a physical illness that would not budge, and it just got worse and worse and worse. And it was only when then I stopped. And it's sad, really. And actually, for quite a while, I was cross at myself for getting to the point where my body was screaming at me, and then my mind was screaming at me, going, something's got to change. And because I put my hands up fully, I am one of those people that finds sitting still the hardest thing to do. I can do all the things in the world, but the sitting still bit is the bit I find hardest. But I love what you say about just going outside, because I find even things like where I'm actually out to the house and there's movement in the air, what I tend to do is, to be able to do that, I try and take these moments where I just love feeling the breeze, like on my face, on my body, and actually noticing where I feel it. Because on a day-to-day basis, I wouldn't even think about it and I wouldn't notice it. But that's how I find my kind of calm now, sitting outside and feeling that, and just noticing where I feel it, where I feel the sensations in my body. And it did make me laugh, actually, when you said we're a lot nicer. I'm a lot nicer when I take that time for myself. I'm so much more patient with my children, and I get a lot more done, actually. Funnily, by pausing, I'm more efficient when it comes to actually coming back to the doing of what I need to do.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because as you're talking, the realization that I'm just now having is that we embody every single day. And it's what we're embodying that will then create the transformation. So as you were saying, like, I think to myself, like, I was embodying the type A multitasking, like always getting it done. And it was in my body to do that. So yes, sitting still was not something that was familiar, because I had embodied this really high voltage, high octane type of life. And then switching to that, part of the self-led piece. So any of your listeners that are like, I can't sit still and going outside is not my thing. What we get to do is find those moments where you have found yourself in a pause. So that might be in the shower. That might be driving, turn off the radio, and you're fully present. That's part of the embodiment piece. It's experimenting and trying on. If it's not going and standing outside, maybe it's going to an art museum, or maybe it's going grocery shopping. Each one of us has a moment where we have that little glimpse of quiet. It's just a practice of finding where that quiet moment is, and then expanding the space around it, and spending a little bit more time, and noticing the results. When you start noticing, like you said, you're nicer, it's like, oh, I feel better when I do this. And that becomes the embodiment practice.
That's interesting you saying that, actually. I think because one of my calm places is if I go to a coffee shop. There's something about the background noises, and I know that I do that because you've actually only just made me realize this, because I literally sit back and I hold the cup with both my hands and I sip the coffee and my eyes closed. I'm like, oh, that tastes so good. And it's that moment, actually, that's the moment where I'm not thinking about anything else apart from this. Oh, this chair is comfortable, this coffee smells good, this coffee tastes good. Oh, I've got both my hands, I'm not multitasking, both my hands are on the coffee cup, and I'm taking that pause right there. You know, and actually, yeah, I did. It's interesting because I got into the practice of making sure I was doing that regularly, you know, going to a place and having that moment, because you can feel it. You actually can feel it deep in your body, can't you? You know?
Yeah,
And I love that, actually, what you say about that we are embodying every single day. So, you know, whoever's listening right now, whatever you're being right now, that you are embodying something. And I love the fact that, yeah, actually it comes back to a choice then. Do I want to be? I lived those 15 years. Yeah, in fact, all of my life up until this point, I'm 40 next year, and I've lived all of the first part of my life in hyper-focus mode. Of do, which was such a strong masculine energy of just doing. And then I've spent this last 2 years trying to kind of release that as much as possible. I'm not there yet. But kind of step into the more of the feminine energy of flow and allowing. And that, I have to say, this has probably been the most challenging year of my life, you know, doing that and releasing. And it's taken physically releasing so much in my life to then be able to step into the kind of that mindset more. And I still do, I slip and I switch back, but I notice it a lot more now. And so I just feel like this is kind of a life's journey. This is something that I'm not working on, that's probably the wrong word. I'm noticing daily, and trying to take those moments, like you say, and actively, you know, put myself in a place that's going to give me that moment as well. I think makes a big difference.
It does. It absolutely does. And I think it's important to recognize that where we have been is contributing to where we are now. So no shame or judgment for the high octane living. We sometimes use certain words, and linguistics is something that I'm really fascinated by. We'll use words like rejection, or we'll use words like, for instance, some of the work that I do is how we've repressed the feminine because we were in this masculine world. And then it's like, well, the masculine's not negative either. So finding ways to go, everything that I have had experienced in my life has led me to this moment. And then as I continue to evolve through the next stage, it will lead me to the next moment. Because I think sometimes we'll punish ourselves for not being there, air quotes, being there. And I think I believe that part of our existence on this planet is to live consciousness as life. So each experience, each moment, each day we wake up, we get to have those choices of, is this how I want to go through the day? And then we reflect at the evening time, what went well? What went really, really well, that we can give ourself a pat on the back and take stock? And then what didn't go so well, that tomorrow I can maybe focus on that a little bit better. Give myself the space and the grace to be who I am in this moment and all the other moments that have compiled. Yes.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I do believe that the whole purpose of life is the experience of it. And, you know, this is why I feel like being present is so important. And do you know, it's interesting actually, because I think the first part of this transformation that I've been through, I spent a long time not regretting, but almost being cross at myself. So it wasn't a regret, it was I was cross at myself for not doing something earlier to change it. And now I actually look back at everything prior to now with absolute love for it, because I completely understand that everything that I have been through, you know, I cherish my children, and, you know, I feel very proud of everything that I did over, you know, and worked towards and built, and the life that I had. I actually now I'm at a point where I look back at that and I feel so incredibly proud and thankful, and I look at it with total love. But that has been a huge process, you know, of coming away from, why didn't I do something earlier? Why haven't I changed this? Why can't I do this? Why can't I be present? You know, that real, we're very hard on ourselves. We're you know, I find that my voice in my head is often very angry at me. But now I look back and it's just that understanding that everything that has happened, I'm so thankful for, because it has got me here now. And I feel so much more attuned to what I'm supposed to be doing, even though I haven't got that absolute clarity yet, because I know it's something that's going to keep evolving and keep changing. But knowing that I'm on the right path, and I can 100% say that I am on the right path. I know it, I can feel it in me. And I had to kind of get to a point where I could look back at everything and go, I'm really glad I was that person. Now I get to be who I am now, and I get to continue forward, and I get to keep growing. And I feel like that makes quite a big difference. And I think there was something actually that you said in your live about the knowing, and Franca and I talk about knowing a lot, actually. And, you know, the fact that so often you will know before your mind knows, like you feel it before your brain knows it. And then, but I feel like what you said takes it further, and you said about turning that into wisdom. And I really love that thought. It's kind of, it feels like that's the next step, you know, when you know, and when you start realizing things about yourself, and you kind of understand it all more, and then turning that into wisdom. I mean, how would you say that the kind of wisdom side of it shows or plays out? Or
Certainly, and I think the first, I'm enjoying this conversation because there's so much that you're sharing that I'm like, me too. I those feelings, and I still get them. One of the first elements, and this might be helpful to you and your listeners. When I learned this, it was such a game changer for the use of words. And instead of asking, why is this happening to me? Why am I this way? I started switching that to, what can I learn from this? How can I get the understanding or the lesson from this? So that turns the wounds or any sort of pain into this wisdom piece. So switching the question up from why to what and how, huge game changer. Because what the brain will do when you say why, it's going to look for all the possibilities. And there's thousands of possibilities for why we did the things that we did when we were younger. The knowing comes from that self-led piece in my experience. I remember being younger and just desiring wisdom. I remember praying for wisdom. I don't know any 9-year-old that does that, but wanting to know all of this knowledge on a deeper level. And I'll never forget, it was when I was learning Spanish. And I remember my instructor saying, when you can start to dream in Spanish, then you have learned the language. So it's any language. When you begin to dream in that language, you have learned the language. And it was a practice of every single day. Now, of course, I had instructors at the time, so there was a lot more discipline, but every day practicing, every day taking how I heard something and then starting to hear it in my own mind and in my own words. And what you said, as far as sometimes we know things on a physical level before we know them mentally, oftentimes what we'll do is we'll know something physically, and then the mind will start to logic it. It will look for deletions and distortions and overgeneralizations, and we will talk ourselves out of our knowing. And so sometimes it does come back to just being present and being fully in the experience to then understand what the knowing is, and asking yourself the question that I just said, what can I learn from this? And how can I apply this to the next time this happens? How can I apply this to what I already know? And I think wisdom comes with time. Definitely.
I really feel that. And I think you're so right, as in, I found through experience, personal experience, that the choices that I have made that have led me to where I am now have made absolutely no logical sense. There was no rationalizing it. I had to go with that inner knowing, like that, because there was no other way. My brain tried really hard to make some of those choices make sense, and they didn't. And yet here I am. And before we started this conversation, I said to you that, at this point in my life, I'm feeling more empowered than I ever have in my entire life. And so those complete illogical choices on the outside world actually made the most sense, but on inner sense, because I was guided purely by that knowing, by that feeling, by knowing that that things had to shift, and I had to do things differently. And that meant making some choices that made sense to nobody else but me. And even to me, my brain couldn't make sense of them, and yet they were the right choice.
The body has a lot of wisdom. And I think what we, especially particularly as females, and I know men go through this as well, but we have such an adverse relationship with our body based on, going through puberty and growing up, comparing our bodies to other bodies, and the judgment and the shame. And if we've had personal experiences where we've rejected the body and the wisdom that the body has for us, even so much, it's interesting, even so much the choices. So when we were younger, knowing something physically, and then outside world says, no, that's not the case. Being fearful. I remember, like, my daughter, the first time she went on a roller coaster, she was scared. And I had to decide whether or not I tell her, no, you're not scared, just get on the roller coaster. And I remember catching myself saying, absolutely, you're scared. You've never done this before. But just those words of being told, no, you shouldn't feel this way. This is not the right feeling. This is how you should be feeling, or it's okay, don't worry about it. And so that starts creating the split in the relationship that we have with our bodies. And what you were just saying, as far as being able to make a decision, that internally, and that takes a lot of reclamation. It takes some time to just spend with, what does it feel like for me to make a decision, as opposed to asking the outside world to contribute to that. What does it feel like for me? And then the process of, I don't want to say convincing other people, but releasing the need to have other people responsible for how you feel, whether that's supporting you or not supporting you. And that's a challenge. That's why, you want to surround yourself with people that will encourage you and say, if you believe this is good for you, then we trust you, we're going to support you.
Oh, 100%. I mean, relationships are so important. You've kind of got the relationship with yourself, which is everything you was just talking about, and trusting that knowing, and then relationship with others makes such a huge difference. And that means kind of putting yourself with people that lift you up, and understanding when you need to release people as well. And I have understood that more than I ever have in my whole life, actually, over this last year. And it's interesting what you're saying about, it's funny because I look back at my 16-year-old self when this whole process started for me. And I was like, I knew myself more then because I hadn't learned to fit into all the should boxes yet. And it was this process of small things. And I even remember like some of the key things that have happened that has taught me something or a way of behaving. And when this all started for me, it was all this huge process of unlearning. It's taking all of those things that I have spent the last 15 years learning and going, holy crap, like, I need to release this now and unlearn it all, which is a process I'm still going through, because this is a whole lot of stuff that I've learned over 15 years.
Clearing out the closet.
Yeah, clearing out that closet. And you know, I really completely understand the value of relationships and good relationships. And you know, and I'm talking about, you know, I'm pulling myself into this, and that relationship with myself and trusting my body as well, and then those that are around me. And I have learned so much from those relationships, and I'm so thankful for the ones that have been there and have been supporting me and have lifted me without judgment and all of that, even if they haven't understood. And I'm also thankful for those that I've actually had to release too, because I now know myself better. And if they hadn't, you know, if it hadn't have been a relationship that perhaps got me to that point of needing to release it, that taught me something about myself. So I'm actually very thankful for those as well. And I feel like it's actually through these relationships you learn so much about you.
The whole self-leadership and embodiment practice cannot happen in isolation. I mean, we could try going to go live on top of a mountain and, you know, decide that we're going to embody this monk or nun type lifestyle. But unless we have some contrast to really present itself in front of us and make us choose, it's really hard to do that without being in relationships. I actually recently just had a pivotal moment of realizing where I had spent a majority of my life managing other people's energy in the effort to bring what I thought was harmony to myself. So one of my newsletter is called Wild Harmony. And the reason is because that is another good girl myth, that if everybody else is happy, then I'll feel full and complete and whole. And I noticed that I was running up against an immense amount of physical exhaustion, depletion, and, for lack of a better term, displeasure in my life. And I was managing my husband's energy, I was managing my daughter's energy, I was managing even my client's energy to make sure that everybody else was okay, but I wasn't okay. And it was a process of the self-leadership piece. And what I think you had mentioned something about my view on relationships. In order for this all to come to the pinnacle of where it's at right now, I had to release my husband of the responsibility to make me feel any sort of way and call that power back. What was interesting is my mind immediately went to, well, what does that look like? Does that mean that we're separating? Does that mean like all the worst case scenarios? And the reality was, it was no, give myself the same amount of attention that I've been giving everybody else. Am I okay? Are my needs being taken care of? Is my energy feeling good? Am I going through the process of my day, making sure that all the responsibilities are taken care of for me? And there's, you know, the term, the selfless and selfish. What I started to realize is that a friend of mine says self first. In that process, what I started to notice was that the dynamics of my home started to shift. In the US, I don't know how they have this term over there, but it's like happy wife, happy life.
Yes.
It's true. It is so true. But I feel like as women, we want to take care of other people because that's that natural thing. And that's often means we neglect ourselves. So releasing people of that responsibility, it's amazing the level of respect that you give to people when you do that. It's like
Mm.
me and our interaction, I see you as a whole complete person. So therefore, I can let you be you and I can be me, and then we can coexist, which then creates a huge, beautiful dynamic. And that's the other part of it with relationships, is learning to see where you're projecting or putting onto other people the responsibility to make you feel whole, complete, and enough. And instead going, okay, I'm whole, complete, and enough now. Then how's that dynamic? How does that dynamic get to play out?
Yeah, I feel so much of what you're saying, and how, you know, seeing this in my own life, I really feel this, and I understand about myself that I spent a very long time people pleasing, like literally my entire life. I think it's something that I developed as a child and then has just gone on from there. And you see it, and it's these patterns, and then you get to a point though where you realize you're not okay, and then
Mhm.
this point where you think, you feel like it's the environment you're in or the people you're around, and actually it's where you've been neglecting your own needs.
Yes.
And one thing that I have to say now that I am quite an advocate for is asking for what you need, asking
Mhm.
for what you want. And that means asking yourself, but also the people that you have in your life, you know, telling them your needs, actually voicing it. This is a big thing for me at the moment, is actually voicing the things that I want to voice. And it makes such a difference, because then they have the choice. They understand whether, you know, they can be there for that, and actually they get to say whether they can't as well. And then, you know, you get to move forward. I love what you said about coexisting. You know, they are whole, you are whole, and you get to kind of see whether this is that kind of right fit for you now. And I feel that there's a lot of power in that, actually.
Yeah.
I love what you said, like self-leadership, isn't it? It's, yeah, taking control and understanding your own needs. And I think that's been a big thing for me, is actually me getting to a point, and this is why I look back at everything that, you know, my whole life, this beautiful picture of my whole life that has led me to now. And I'm so thankful for it, because it has given me an understanding of what I need,
Mhm.
in my life, and what I need from the relationships that I have in my life, you know. And that's all relationships, you know, parents, friends, partners, you know. It's, I now understand what it is that I need, and I get to voice that.
Mhm.
And also, you know, get this, I feel the one thing that perhaps I didn't have or wasn't very strong for quite a long time was boundaries, my own personal boundaries. And
Mhm.
there was so much kind of crisscrossing and people pleasing happening that I completely lost myself at one point. Oh, that's how I felt. um so it's been kind of this rebuilding process, learning about myself, and then being able to, because it means now that I can show up in, you know, what, all of my relationships fully as
Mhm.
well.
Mhm.
And also, you know, learning about myself and understanding where my energy is, and having days where I'm like, I'm drained today, and
Mhm.
saying no to things, you know. Being able to say no to things and go, oh, I'm allowed to do that.
Yes, you are. Yes. Well, I love that the concept of like rebuilding or reinventing who you are. I love to think of it like you've just gone to this beautiful buffet
Mm,
and you're walking by with your plate and you're picking and putting things onto your plate that you've maybe never tried before. You take a bite and you then think, "Ooh, this is really good. I like this. I'm going to go get back more of this." Or you bite something, you're like, not quite part of the palate, and so then you just say, "That's not for me," and that's the no. And making a play or making having the fun with where we are in our transformation is so, so key because we can slip into berating ourselves for where we thought we should be by now. Or we can look at it with the perspective of, okay, today was one of those days where I am not putting that on anymore. That gets to be released. And if it comes by again, I know how to say no, right?
mm,
Or if something is coming down the conveyor belt at the buffet and it's like, ooh, I want more of that. I want more beauty. I want more pleasure. I want more joy. I want more laughter in my life. Then it's not so much chasing it. We just are open to allowing it to come to us.
Mm, I love that so much. And yeah, and I mean, this is it for me. You know, I feel like this whole podcast, everything that I'm doing right now is about living life with joy.
Mhm.
Joy and pleasure and love and beauty and all of it, because I feel like what an empowered woman is the full picture. It's the whole picture. It's the relationships, it's the environment, it's our relationship with ourselves, our self-awareness, everything. And you know, everything that you've just said just sums it up so perfectly. This is how we get to live that life of joy. Yeah,
Yes.
completely. Oh, Jamila, this has been such a beautiful conversation. I could just talk to you all day. It's amazing. Thank you so, so much. And I'm sure that people are going to absolutely love to kind of follow you and see what else you have to say and perhaps work with you as well. So, where could they go to come and find you?
Well, before I say that, it has been a delight to be in this company, in this space with you. You are absolutely amazing. And this podcast, I've gone and listened to a few of your other episodes. It's just, it brings beauty and joy into my day. So thank you for
Oh,
that.
thank you. That makes me so happy.
As far as finding me, I'm on Instagram and it's Jamila_Theobold. I am I can't let the cat out of the bag yet, but there's something coming as far as like another home for me on in the interwebs. But that's basically where I spend most of my time and hang out is on Instagram. I like to make things as simple as possible for myself. So trying to be on so many different social media platforms. I tried it, I tasted it, I did not enjoy it. So no.
You cleared that one out of the closet. That one went.
So that I have opportunities to try different things like doing reels and playing with stories. So on Instagram, that's my playground. Yeah.
Perfect. Oh, honestly, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. And I can't wait for people to listen to this. And if anybody wants to get in touch and perhaps talk to me further, then contact me at Joyce Misfit. And obviously, Jamila's just told you where to find her as well. So thank you, Jamila.
Thank you, Emma. Thank you so much. Well, have a beautiful day. In case
And
nobody's,
you.
I love you.
And you. Bye.